So I was at a work dinner last week and somebody casually says to me, you should move cities, marry a rich man, and quit your job. Now, this was dinner number 2. We had had a late night dinner the night before, and then that day we were in back-to-back meetings, stuck inside this office that was recently described like The Office in the show Severance. And also, most of the team was in town except for my favorite team member. And it was a lot like, going to school back in the day and like your best friend not being there, or just, it was somewhat brutal, and I 10 out of 10 do not recommend. So there I am, dinner number 1. I got asked if I have any kids. The answer is no. Then at dinner number 2, I get told I should move cities, I should marry a rich man, and I should quit my job. So, I'm in the middle of dinner number 2, and the conversation that was going on was like, okay, if we won the lottery, what would we do with the money? Which, that topic in and of itself makes me laugh, because it's like, if you really want financial abundance, like the way to do that is to build your own business. And you have way better odds at reaching that level of abundance that you would win through a lottery, if not exceed that level of abundance, if you just built your own business. Because the only thing that's standing in the way between where you are today and having that financial abundance is yourself. It's you against yourself at the end of the day. So I always think that conversation of like, what would you do if you won the lottery, is always just like funny, because it's just like, if you really wanted to win the lottery, you should just build a business. So anyways, so we're talking about that, and we were also talking about, solo travel, and I was talking about like how I want to plan my next solo trip. So in the middle of that conversation, somebody else at the table leans over, and that's when they say to me, Allie, you should move cities. You should move to this particularly rich city in Florida. You should marry a rich man, and you should quit your job. And immediately I was like, hold on. This was so oddly specific on the city that I should move to, that I was like, wait a minute. This person just projected their dreams onto me. And so at this point, I can't really correct them, because if I correct them, it would almost feel like I'm invalidating their dreams, or I'm saying that their dreams aren't possible, or I'm saying that I'm basically hating on their dreams. And I didn't want that. That was not the vibe that I wanted to send. And it was sort of this split-second realization of like, this isn't about me. And it's not the first time this sort of thing has ever happened. It certainly won't be the last, but it was one of the first times it sort of happened in this environment, and so I was caught off guard a little bit. And what I've been realizing, especially as I've been in my 30s, is that when somebody sees an independent single woman with no kids, they sort of see us as a blank canvas, which in a way is true. But if we picture, okay, there's like a blank canvas on the wall. I'm holding a paintbrush that's loaded with paint. I know what color the paint is on the paintbrush, but no one else knows what color it is until I actually paint on the canvas. Then there's somebody else standing right next to me with paint on their brush. Let's say it's gray paint. And it's like we're both standing in front of this blank canvas. And it's like before I could even place any marks on the canvas, they're trampling over me to brush gray paint all over the canvas. And when we're in these situations, we leave without ever having painted anything on the canvas. It's like you don't know what I was going to paint on that, and you don't know what color paint I even had. And, it's precisely in these moments where we become secret gardens, because it's like all that blank space that was there was just swallowed up by this other person who thinks they know exactly what to paint, when it's like, you didn't leave space for magic to happen. You didn't leave space for the other person to express themselves. I think for all of us who have been in these kinds of situations, we've gotten really good at knowing when something isn't about us versus is about us. And in these situations where we can quickly clock, like, whatever that person just said was not about me, it's actually about them. We know that, it's not even worth bringing up our own perspective, because if we say our own perspective, we know it's not going to land, because that other person is so locked in to their own vision, their own dream, their own thoughts, that whatever we're going to say is just sort of going to offend them in a way, which is crazy, because they were the ones who just copied and pasted their dreams over ours. But these situations are so hard, though, because they leave us just feeling misunderstood. And in this situation, I'm like, I can't necessarily share what my real desires are. I'm in a work setting, how am I supposed to go about this? And so it was sort of putting me in this situation of like having to hold two versions of myself. And I was just becoming super exhausted by it. And, it was also leaving me feeling just like so unseen and underestimated, because I'm like, oh, you think the solution is for me to marry a rich guy? Like, you really think that that's the solution? Like, that programming is so old. You think that's my goal in life? It's just like, that's so outdated. And it's in these moments where I swear I like channel my inner Cher, and I'm just like, I am a rich man. And I'm pretty sure I walked like I I walked out of that restaurant, and I get in the car, turn the car on. I'm like, I am a rich man. Let's go. And I had quite a long car ride home to think about this. It was like a 45-minute car ride. It was dark. I'm like listening to Moonlight by XXX Tentacion, which, disclaimer, I do not condone any sort of actions that he did late in his life. I just happened to be listening to his music that night. So just to set the vibe for you, that's what I was I'm there. I am. I'm like, I am a rich man, and I'm also listening to this sort of like melancholy music at night on a pretty nice night drive home. So I'm on my drive home, and I start thinking more about this whole like feeling misunderstood bit. And what I started to become very aware of is like, God, I'm the only single person on my team at work. And for the most part, I'm one of the only people without kids. And then I started asking myself a series of questions of like, am I settling for being misunderstood? Why am I okay with being in an environment that doesn't reflect my current reality or model the sort of reality that I want for myself? And why am I okay with being in an environment where other people project their wants and dreams onto me, especially when those wants and dreams don't align with my own wants and dreams? And, if it were a slightly different situation where, like, let's say I'm in an environment and the people, like, what the people are projecting onto me are the things that I actually want and desire, that would be completely different to me, because in that case, it's like so expansive, because I'm like, oh my God, you see in me like the thing that I want to become. So that would be completely different in my mind. But in this case, I'm just like, why am I keeping myself in these environments where it's just like, I feel like such an outsider, you know? I just feel misunderstood. So as I'm on my drive home, I'm like, I got the music turned up. It's dark outside. I'm just fully in my thoughts. I'm thinking about how I just feel unseen and misunderstood. I start to reframe things where it's like, okay, how can I make sure I'm completely seeing myself? Because with this sort of narrative of like, oh, you have to marry a rich man, I think with that narrative and that programming, you're in a lot of examples that I've seen of this, the woman like totally loses sight of who she is because she's now operating in service of this man. And, you know, disclaimer, like, I know there are examples that are not that. But, you know, I think a lot of what is portrayed in the media is that kind of example. And so when somebody's trying to place me in this programming and push me into the programming of like, you must marry a rich man, to me, the way to break out of that is to double down on how can I fully see myself? You know, because as this person at work was saying this stuff to me, it's like I couldn't necessarily tell them that I'm building a podcast. And I couldn't necessarily say like, I don't need a man to fund my life. But what I can do is remind myself who I am and what I desire. And so that brought on this whole other line of questioning, which was asking myself, like, how can I pour so much energy, love, care, passion into my dreams? And, you know, at that point, I was like, pretty much most of the way home, like I was, you know, approaching the house. And towards the end of the car ride, I gave myself this prompt of just like, wouldn't it be cool if, you know, all the different things that I'm thinking about of like, oh, that's probably like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. How can I bring that into the now? Like, what if I just acted on all of that stuff now? How can I rearrange my current routine to make it feel more exciting than it currently is? Like, if I were able to do that, what would I change? How would it look like? And that started just like sparking a bunch of different ideas. But I think the overarching root of it all, or like the thing that was at the very root of that, was solo travel. And, you know, on that car ride, it's like the more I started to ask myself these questions, it's like I got into the car initially feeling like I was placed in a box. And as I continued on the car ride, it was almost like I was taking a sharp object and slowly shattering the walls of the box that I was placed in. And it was just this experience of empowerment. And I think solo travel is just a form of radical defiance. And when I think about being placed in this box of like, oh, you have to marry a rich man and you have to follow his life and do whatever the fuck he wants and all this stuff, like you're a puppet to him, is like basically what when I hear that narrative, like that's what I think. Solo travel is a way to like fully exist as if the world is your playground. And it's you using your resources, as in money, you're using your money to do exactly what you authentically want to do. You can go wherever you want. You can do whatever you want. You aren't waiting for a partner or a friend to be ready. You know, you're just going. And you're not waiting for a reason to celebrate either. And honestly, like, you not subscribing to someone else's version of you is the thing to celebrate. You know, it's such incredible progress for us to even be able to do that in this life as women. And, for me, I'm like, when I think about my next solo trip, the thing that I'm like, oh my God, this is my biggest goal is it's like, those women who they walk into the room and like their energy is just so loud in the best way. It's like, oh my God, who are you? You have such an incredible energy. You're just like radiant. And the woman like walks into the restaurant. She gets a table for one. Maybe she sits at the bar. She looks so fucking good in her outfit. And you can just tell that she's just cool. Like she's just there existing so at peace in her own presence. Maybe she's at a fine dining restaurant. Maybe she's reading a book. It's like she's so comfortable in her own presence. And that's literally like when I think about solo travel, like as I'm thinking about it now, it is that. Like that's one of my biggest goals is to be in a completely unknown city, a new city to me, and just be able to exist in the world in that way. And that's totally what I'm working towards. And, I think to me that just, it's almost like the cherry on top of having your own shit going for you. This makes me think of about a year ago, I was in New York. I was having lunch with a friend. We were at like a 3-hour lunch. And we were sort of talking about this thing. We weren't specifically talking about this narrative of you have to marry a rich man, but we were talking about things in the sense of you have to have your own shit going for you. And they were saying like one of the biggest learnings coming out of their last relationship was this very thing. Because when you have a partner who has a lot of shit going for them and you don't necessarily have things going for you that you're like so excited about and so passionate about, it can be easy to just default to what your partner is passionate about. And that's sort of where this conversation was going. Was my friend was just like, I didn't feel like I had a leg to stand on because like this person was so overpowering in what they were wanting to do. And I felt like I was sacrificing myself to do what they wanted to do. And so that's how like one of the biggest learnings was just like, you have to have your own shit going for you. And I think having your own shit going for you is so important for our own well-being and our own stability, and just making sure that we have a foundation for ourselves that is stable, and a foundation for ourselves to where it's like any future decision we aren't making out of lack or desperation or fear that, we could lose everything. We don't have to cling to things because we know we're cool with the foundation that we have for ourselves. And, I think this whole form of independence is so liberating. And I think about how this type of freedom, this freedom to move around the world and do whatever the fuck you want, walk into these restaurants looking so good in your own energy, sitting down, having maybe a 3-course meal, having a nice glass of wine or two, and just like existing is so badass. And I think it's precisely that sort of freedom that is, anyone who's intimidated by that won't come around. You'll scare those people away. But the people who are not intimidated by that will just magnetize to you. And I think those are the kinds of people that we want in our lives, right? Like people who are magnetized to that sort of energy. In all of this, let's make no mistake, it's not that we're pushing anyone away. We're not doing that. We're simply just not waiting for people in order to do the things that we really want to do. We're just going and doing them. And, it's coming from a place of like, the people who bring value to our lives are absolutely welcome. They're always going to be welcome in our lives, but we're just not waiting. And so, I'm having like this whole spiral of thought in my brain, like as I'm walking into my apartment. I like open up my laptop. I'm like remembering this email that my friend sent to me like 6 months ago, where she's like, here's my solo trip recommendations. Here are all the places that I've been that have been so incredible solo. And she's like, Montreal, New York, Toronto, Amsterdam, Mexico City, Lisbon. Like, she's just like rattling off all these things. It's so funny because this is happening sandwiched between two things. One, a couple episodes ago, I did a whole episode about how moving cities isn't the answer, and how I was having this urge to run, and like the whole point, it is sort of battling this urge to run. And here I am just like, I want to go on solo travel. But I think this is the thing that can like fuel my soul. I am a Sagittarius. It's like when I really think about just like, what's the thing that gets me so excited? It is travel. It is seeing the world from a different perspective, and like being able to expand my own perspective. So that was one thing that happened previously. Then I had this dinner, and then tomorrow, actually, the friend who sent me all the solo travel recommendations, she's actually in town, and I'm going to lunch with her. I'm not going to tell you exactly where I'm going to go on my solo trip for safety purposes, and you're not going to know when I'm going, but I'm so excited. I can't wait. I think this is such a powerful way of like, the biggest lesson in all of this for me has been like, whenever somebody tries to place us in a box, could be a box as old as time, of like, marry a rich man. I think the most powerful thing that we can do is to double down on what fuels our soul and what makes us us. Like, what's going to make us come alive. And the more we can double down on that, I think the more we can essentially like shatter the walls of the box that we're placed in. So I'm sure if you're watching this, you've absolutely experienced this sort of shit before, where it's like people have placed this sort of programming on you. I was voice noting a friend the other day, and she's like, yeah, people have said that to me so many different times. She's in a similar spot as me. And it's just like, God, we all face this. We all face this sort of narrative. And so the next time you face this narrative, like, I hope that you just realize like, oh my God, you have so much freedom, and you have a way to liberate yourself. This doesn't have to make you sad. Yeah, it's totally cool to feel sad and like feel some type of way about, not fitting in with societal expectations. But on the other side of that, like, the world in your life is a blank canvas, and that's so beautiful, and that's such a privilege. So thank you so much for being here this week. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.